This conference will now be recorded.
Hi guys, good morning. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, so let us start. I see if still people are not in. Hmm? చెప్తా అన్నప్పుడు వినరు, తర్వాత చేయాల్సి వచ్చినప్పుడు కింద మీద పడతారు. Hmm? So all people from 5 to 1 are in. So 5 to 1 కాకుండా another batches who are there, who are attending from other batches. Okay, whoever it is, I will continue my session. So first of all, macros. A macros is nothing but a stored text. What is a macro? A macro is nothing but a stored text. Right. So whenever you wanted to perform repeated actions, okay, whenever you wanted to perform repeated actions, so then we will use macros. Then we will use macros. Okay, right. Macro is a stored code that can be used repeatedly with macro name. A macro is a stored code that can be used repeatedly with a macro name. Suppose to say I wanted to use a function, I suppose to say if I wanted to use a functionality multiple times, couple of times, then I can use this macros. Right. Next, uses of macros reduce the amount of programming needed for repeated tasks. Reduce the amount of programming needed for repeated tasks. Right. Next, first of all, it will reduce the amount of programming needed for repeated tasks. For example, I have a task. I wanted to read data from, I wanted to read data from, you know, Excel sheet. If you wanted to read data from Excel sheet, how will do? How will you write a code? If you wanted to read data from Excel sheet, how will you write a code?
Proc
Proc
import
import data files.
Proc import data file equal to, I want everyone to write a data. I want everyone to write this code. Everyone please write this piece of code. How to read data from Excel file to SAS. I want everyone to write. I'm not seeing people writing the code. Why you guys are not writing here? What is your problem? If you don't know how to write the data from Excel file, how should I explain? So now, if you wanted to read data from Excel file to SAS, this is the technique we use, correct? So D drive test sample.xlsx out equal to ds1 sample replace run, correct? So I will run this program. It will read data from SAS to stuff. Suppose to say in my system I have D drive. So I have the files book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. So if you wanted to read data from multiple files to SAS, so what we will do, I will write D drive book 1 dot XLS. So copy path, I will write correct. So D drive book 1 dot SAS. Okay, right. So if you wanted to read another file, so this is XLS file, I should use DBMS is XLS. If I wanted to read data from another file, so you see, right, I will write D drive book2 dot XLS and DBMS is equal to XLS out equal to DS2. So if you notice here, what are the places you are changing your code? What are the places you are changing the code? What are the places we are changing the code? So first one is we are changing the path and we are changing the dataset name. Okay, we are changing the dataset name. Okay, right. So now just whenever you are writing a piece of code, whenever you are writing a code for same functionality again and again, in this case you have to focus two areas, you see, right? So this is the one location you are changing the path, you are right, you are changing your code, and this is the one location you are changing the code. Rest everything is same, right? Rest everything is same, right? So now
Yes, sir.
here what you are supposed to do is identify the areas where you are changing the code. So here you are changing the code. So here what you do, right? You write ampersand path. And here you create macro variable ampersand dname. So all your macro variable names should start with ampersand. All your macro variable names should start with ampersand. Okay, right. So now you can see here percentage macro, macro name, percentage macro. So what is the functionality? I'm writing this macro. It is for importing data. So percentage macro, macro name is import. Inside bracket, you have to write the column names which we have created in code. So what is the macro variable name? First we have written path, comma, dname. So these are the two variables which we created in our code, correct? So simply you have to write them inside brackets and percentage mend. Mend nothing but m end, macro end. So it's not mend, we have to read it as m end. M end is nothing but macro end. So if you run the program, it will execute, but it will not show any data set, it will not show any errors. So if you run the program, you see submit window, it is creating a catalog called macros catalog. This icon we call it as a catalog. Gurtunda? So this icon we call it as a catalog. Here we have created a macro import. So if you see log window, there is not showing, it's not showing any error or warning because I told you macro is a stored code. Okay, stored text. Macro is nothing but a stored text. So it will just read this information as a text and save it in this macros catalog. So now if you wanted to use this macro, if you wanted to invoke, if you wanted to call this macro, you have to write percentage import. You have to write percentage import. Percentage import bracket start path. Path is D drive book1.xls. D drive book1.xls. Already here you have inside inverted commas here, right? So no need to write inverted commas here. D drive book1.xls, comma dataset name. Dataset name I wanted to give ds1 bracket close semicolon. So say this semicolon is not mandatory, but we give as a regular practice. So now if you run the program here, it will create a data set ds1. So you see that the data set work.ds1 is successfully created, right? So if you go and see ds1 data set exists. You got the point, yes or no? Whatever the information you have in this Excel, it is reading it. So book one, you have two values it has read, correct? Two rows it has read, correct? Is that clear everyone, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
And even though you have decimal places, still this is reading it as a numeric value, no problem. Right, next. If suppose to say if you wanted to read data from another file, this time no need to write proc import full text. Just simply copy this piece of code, percentage import, inside bracket, you write the location of the file. So D drive, I have another Excel file, it is book2, and you can write ds2. So if you run the program, it will create empty data set with name ds2. So it will create a data set with name ds2. It will read all the data from that book2 Excel file, it will create here. Is that clear to everyone, yes or no? Is that clear to everyone, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So likewise, how many files you wanted to write, you have to create this way. You just need to write one single line. Hardly 10 words is doing the job, right? Correct? So this is how I read data. This is how I read data from Excel using a concept called macros. So every time you write proc import, it will increase your length, right? Length of your code, right? So using macros, we can reduce the amount of programming needed for repeated tasks. minimize on typing errors and typing and execution errors. The more the program, the more the text you write it there, the more the typing errors you will have. So you can minimize typing and execution errors. Next, making the variables global. So it will make your variables global. Okay, it will make your variables global. Next, simplifying the code. So it will simplify the code. Simplify the code is nothing but, you have a lot of text, all that information it will consider and it will simplify the code. In macros, we have only one data type. It is character data type. So macros are always a character data type. A macro is nothing but a stored text. Generally, macros takes longer time than when compared to a normal SAS program because we have some extra steps. So whenever we are writing a macro, it means we are writing a program that writes a program. Whenever we are writing a macro, it means we are writing a program that writes a program. So whatever the program you are writing here, this program at the back end, it will write this complete program. In this, it will fit the values. In this, it will fit the values. Right. Next, the macro processor. So here, what are the macro statements we are giving in SAS? So you will have your macro processor. You see right percentage import. So you see right inside bracket we are writing information, correct? So your macro statements will be analyzed by macro processor and it will convert into a standard SAS program. It will convert it into a standard SAS program. If you are directly writing standard SAS program, this processing time will be saved, right? This processing time will be saved, right? Right. So you can see here standard SAS statements. We are using some standard SAS statements. If you directly use standard SAS statements, this step you can execute. This step can be removed. But if your functionality is for one time, I will not encourage or recommend you to use macros. If your functionality is one time, I will not encourage or recommend you to use macros. But if you are doing the same functionality again and again, in that case, macros will execute your program in lesser period of time. Okay, so whenever you wanted to repeat the functionality again and again, in that case, macros will make your job much more easier, and the processing time also it will take very less because it already has written the program at the backend. It is just changing the input values. Okay, right. So I want you guys to read this point. Read that paragraph. So this is called meta programming. Meta programming is nothing but writing a program which writes the program. So you are done reading this paragraph, yes or no? You are done reading this paragraph, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now, how to check whether macros I can use in my system, yes or no? How to check macros we can use in our system, yes or no? Okay, right. So you can see here, this is how it is. If you wanted to see macros are working in your system, yes or no, you have to use proc options, option is equal to macro. Obviously, we have it. If you see the message macro, it means that macro processor is turned on. If you see the message no macro in log window, it means macro processor is turned off. Okay, proc options, option is equal to macro. Because I have macros enabled, so the reason whenever I have written this macro, it worked and I got the data set. So for you, I will write this code proc options, option is equal to macro. So by default, macros will be enabled in almost all the systems. Nothing to check, but still I'm explaining you, if something is not working, you can check. Okay, so macro, it's right, you got macro, enabled macro facility. Next, macro versus macro variables. SAS macro program basically consists of two basic building blocks. It consists of two basic building blocks. First one, macro triggers. First one, macros, macro variables. Macros start with percentage sign. Macros start with percentage sign and macro variables will start with ampersand. So percentage import. So macro start with percentage sign and macro variables will start with ampersand. Macro variables are two types. First one, system defined automatic macro variables. Second one, user defined macro variables. So user defined macro variables are again classified into two types: global macro variables, local macro variables. Okay, so I repeat, macros will always start with, is right, macros will always start with percentage sign and macro variables will start with ampersand sign. Again, macro variables are classified into two types. First one local, second one global. So local macro variable means if you are using the macro variable inside a macro means inside a percentage macro, inside percentage meant. We call it as a local macro variable. This macro variable will work along with this macro only. This is called a local macro variable. Global means across the globe, like wherever. So you can create this variable outside percentage macro percentage min. For example, the example for global macro variable is percentage let x is equal to 10. So whenever you are creating a macro variable outside percentage macro percentage min, we call it as a global macro variable. We call it as a global macro variable. So you can use this macro variable in any part of your SAS program. Wherever you want, you can use this macro variable value. So two types of variables, local, global. And again, we have system defined, user defined. System defined is they are already predefined in your system. Okay. And user defined is the variables which we are creating now. So path, dname, let x equal to, these are user defined macro variables. I'll show you system defined macro variables also. Next, very important point to be noted here is your macro variables cannot be resolved in a single quotation marks. If you see here, whenever we are writing macro variable inside quotation marks, please make sure you write double quotation marks. If you use a single quotation marks, it will not work. That is the point you have to note. That is the point you have to note. So is this clear to everyone, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right. Next. And automatic macro variables, I was telling about this automatic macro variables. So you cannot create a macro variable with a name starting with sys. Suppose to say you wanted to create a macro variable starting with the name sys, you cannot do it. Okay, right. So here the letter three letter sys, the three letter word sys is fixed for a automatic macro variables. It is reserved for a automatic macro variables. So we cannot create our own macro variable using with sys. The three letter prefix sys is reserved for use by SAS for automatic macro variables. So we cannot create macro variables starting with name sys. We cannot create macro variables with name sys. Right. Next. If you wanted to see list of all automatic macro variables, then I can use percentage put underscore automatic underscore. These are system defined inbuilt macro variables. So in your system automatically we have some macro variables inbuilt. If you wanted to see them, you can use this macro variables. So you see, right? ASDF, so ASD name, AF lib, AF stri. So these are all system inbuilt defined macro variables. So in this, in general, we use sysdate, systime, sysversion. So these are a very few variables. You see, right? Sysversion. So here system version 9.4. So sysdate, it will take your start date. So when your SAS system is used, and it will take that date only. So sys date 27 April 17, sys date 9, you select 9 characters. Sys day Thursday, you select these are system defined automatic macro variables. Every variable, if you see here, it is starting with SYS. Okay, right. So if you wanted to see this macro variables, you can see this, no problem. Suppose to say I have this proc print data equal to ds1, it will show system date, you see, right? So if you see here, it is showing system day, this is system day, and if you see here, it is day, time, date 9, sys version. Sys day is your title, sys date, time, date 9, sys version. So these are all macro variables, automatic macro variables, which are already inbuilt in SAS, right? So these are all some classifications, read write. So automatic variables it is showing in log write. These are some read write. These are only read only. So nothing to with this. You can ignore. Whenever I write percentage put underscore automatic underscore, I got all these macro variables. Sys, you see, right? Sys date 9, sys day. So same I have shown you, right? Same variables, just we have copy pasted. Whatever the information we have in log window, same information is copy pasted in your notes. Right. Macro statements. Macros always start with percentage macro. Percentage macro begins a macro definition, or percentage macro creates a macro. So whenever you wanted to create a macro, we have to write percentage macro, macro name. Inside that you have to write parameters. Parameters nothing but variables. So variables, parameters, columns, all are one and the same. Okay, so inside bracket I am writing macro variable names, path, comma, dname. You see, right? Path, comma, dname. And once we are done with this, we are writing percentage meant. Percentage meant what it will end that particular macro program. It will end that particular macro program. Note, if you specify a macro name with percentage meant statement, that name should be matching with percentage macro statement. That name should match with percentage macro statement. So the reason I will always encourage you to use percentage meant. That's it. If you are writing my macro name, it should match. So if there is a typo error, it will not work properly. So simply write percentage meant. So a macro name is a name you give it for macros. So what are the rules you have to follow while giving names in SAS? So you have learned the basics, right? We all know how to give names in SAS, right? What are the rules you have to consider? How to give names in SAS?
Should start with underscore, no numbers.
No spaces, no special characters.
Mm-hmm. Antena? SAS names must be
Less
SAS
than
name must be
32.
less than or equal to 32 characters.
32
Can start with alphabet or underscore.
underscore.
SAS names can contain alphabets, numbers, and underscore, but not special characters. and you can write in upper letters, small letters. You can write capital letters, small letters, your names. And there should be no space between one variable name. So we already have learned these basics. Very few are talking, others I'm not sure. Okay, fine. So now you can see this is how it works. The general form of a macro is creating modular code with macros. So between percentage macro and percentage ment, you can write any number of statements. So the modular approach is, first of all, we write a standard SAS program, and whenever it is bug free, then we will start converting into a macro program, adding one feature at a time. If you see here, first of all, I have written a normal base SAS program. I have written one more program for the same functionality. I am trying to understand where my piece of code is changing. I have identified the areas where my piece of code is changing, and I have assigned a macro variable. So wherever your piece of code is changed, I am assigning a macro variable. Is that clear, everyone? Yes or no? Is that clear, everyone? Yes or no? So this is called
Yes, sir.
modular approach. This is called modular approach. Right. Invoking a macro, if you write percentage macro, macro name, and if you have macro parameters, you need to give values for that parameters and it will run. So here in this case, I'm not creating any macro variables. So if you wanted to run this, still it will work, no problem. So this functionality is for one-time use. This functionality is for one-time use. So I'm not creating any macro parameters here. So if you run the program, it will create a dataset DS and it will print the dataset DS. Is that right? It is printing the dataset DS, right? And percentage put statement, what it will do? Put statement, what it will do?
It will
Put statement, what
show
it
as
will?
in log.
It will write the information to log window. So percentage put statement will write macro variable information to log window. Macro variable information to log window. Percentage put, it has shown list of all automatic macro variables. Percentage global underscore global, it will write list of all global macro variables. Percentage put underscore all underscore, so it will give list of all local, global, automatic, everything. Before this, I'll create one global macro variable, percentage let x equal to 100. Let x equal to, so right, first of all, it is showing global, and after that, it is showing list of all automatic variables. Okay. Right. Is this clear to everyone? Yes or no? Next. So percentage put user underscore user. So if you wanted to see this user, what macro variables we have created, so we can see that list as well. So this user has created x is equal to 10. Correct. So this is one global variable this user has created. And percentage include, if you wanted to open a program and run, okay, in that case I can use percentage include and I can write the location of the code. For example, I wanted to, okay, so for example, I wanted to, execute this particular piece of code. some test. Right click, properties, security, copy. So what information is present in this? I have a dataset DS here, that's it. So your SAS will create a dataset here. So dataset DS are removed. So whenever I write percentage include 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 inverted comma paste. Okay, so if you run the program here, you see right, it is creating a dataset DS 101, 2, 3, 4. 101, 2, 3, 4. You see right, it is printing it right, MHG KHY. MHGKHY, it is creating the data set, right? So we can run programs, without opening the programs, we can also execute the program using percentage include statement. So this percentage include statement will go to C drive, it will go to the desktop, it will open test.sas and it will submit the program in SAS. It will open at the backend, it will submit the program which is present in this test.sas. So is this clear to everyone? Yes or no? Percentage include is clear to everyone? Yes or no? Percentage include is clear to everyone? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Next. Percentage let. Using percentage let statement, we can create macro variables. Using percentage let statement, we can create macro variables. Percentage let name is equal to Akshara. Percentage let name is equal to Akshara. Let age is equal to 20. Let date is equal to sys function today comma date 9 dot. Okay, right. So now you can see here whenever you are writing percentage let, it will create a macro variable name. Okay, it will create a macro variable age. Whenever you wanted to evaluate a base SAS function into a macro variable, so today is a base SAS function. If you wanted to evaluate this, if you wanted to read this function value into a macro variable, you have to use percentage sys function. Okay, you have to use percentage sys function. Then only it will evaluate that today function. It will store in that macro variable date. Okay, so now if you see here, log window name is Akshara, age is 20, ampersand date is nothing but 27 April 2017. Okay, 27 April 2017. Is that clear to everyone? Yes or no? Suppose to say, if you wanted to use a macro variable, global macro variable, any variable which is created outside percentage macro, percentage meant will be created as global macro variable. For example, I have a data set called models. In this, I have different types of bicycles, models, and the type of the material they have used, track, road, mountain, road, depending upon your requirement, you can select a model and this is the price information, 796 USD. And this is the frame model. So from this, I wanted to select all the classification mountain. So what are the categories? How many models you have for mountain variety? I wanted to print all those. So if you wanted to print this, what is the procedure we use? Proc print. Proc print data equal to models where bike class is equal to mountain. You see right? Where this bike class is a macro variable which I am creating it. So where bike class is equal to mountain means bike class will take the value mountain. So where class is equal to, it will take mountain here and it will print it. And you can see right, current models of, you are using ampersand bike class. Ampersand bike class means it will take mountain. So automatically it will change the title of your report as well. Mountain by scales, automatically it is changing. You see, right? This is a mountain classification. So you can use this macro variable whenever you are creating a variable as global macro variable. You can use this macro variable in any part of your SAS program. You can use for selecting data, you can use for printing titles, all this stuff you can use. Right. So I'll stop this here for today. I want all you guys to practice all these concepts. I want everyone to at least try writing 3 or 4 programs. Normally 5 or 6 I'll say. మీకు 3 or 4 జాలి అదే ఎక్కువ. Okay, so at least everyone write 4 programs, for your functionality. Suppose to say if I wanted to print multiple data sets. Okay, proc print data equal to ampersand dname run. So in print you will give percentage print work.ds, work.ds1, work.ds2, I can change it. So if you wanted to sort, if you wanted to give titles, footnotes, if you wanted to give, um, graphs. So for every functionality you can write macro programs. So for what a functionality you will write, it is your choice. I want everyone to write at least 4 or 5 macro programs tomorrow. Okay, right. So I will also show you another way how to create global macro variables inside a macro that we do using percentage global statement. So these topics we will cover in next class. Okay, that's all for today, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Sir.
Yes, please. Okay, bye.